Our last witness tonight is today is the Canadian Home Builders Association, and now ask the director of that association, Mr. John Kenward, to come to the table. Could I invite you, Mr. Director, to make a presentation of 10 minutes, and after that we will start the question period. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll hand this responsibility over to the President of the Canadian Home Builders Association, Mr. Gary Reardon.
Thank you, John. Distinguished co-chairman, committee members, my name is Gary Reardon. I'm President of the Canadian Home Builders Association. With me this evening, I have my past president. To my immediate left, Mr. Gord Thompson from Toronto. To his left, I have Mr. Laurier Duchesne from Quebec City, a Quebec builder, and John Kenward, our Chief Operating Officer on staff here in Ottawa. I'll point out that both myself, Gord, and Laurier are builders in our own small towns, and I hope that we represent the viewpoint of builders in our presentation here today. I'll start off by saying that we are here on behalf of the 12,000 member firms of CHBA and the hundreds of thousands of employees, suppliers, and subtrades that they employ across Canada. We want to make a constructive contribution to your efforts. We have provided your staff with a preliminary brief in advance, and we will follow up with a more detailed document later on. In that way, we feel we can reflect your questions and comments that may arise after our formal presentation. The topic of housing has not been a major issue in most presentations made to you to date. Our remarks will focus on the issue of jurisdiction over housing in the Canadian Constitution. It is essential to understand that housing in its broadest sense involves much more than housing subsidy programs offered by the federal government under the spending power. It has the following basic dimensions. We are a $40 billion industry, according to Statistics Canada, and we employ nearly 1 million Canadians. Residential mortgages represent over 28% of the value of all assets held by lending institutions in Canada, according to Canadian housing statistics. Housing is the repository of some 47% of all personal equity in Canada. And again, those figures are available from Statistics Canada. I'll tell you that housing is a multifaceted and complex dynamic. I think more generally, housing is viewed as a basic human need. It is a significant factor in mobility of people and services across provincial boundaries. Housing uses an international technology and contributes substantially to Canada's economic competitiveness. Without national housing standards, barriers to a more complete Canadian economic union may be erected. Housing is also a valuable expression of our Canadian identity, heritage, and culture. Aspects of housing can be found at least under six specific items in Section 91, the Constitution Act of 1867, as well as 4 provincial powers under Section 92. Relevant federal powers include regulation of trade and commerce, statistics, banking, weights and measures, interest rates, Indians, and Indian lands. Institutions and programs built on this foundation, of course, go far beyond these powers. In reality, it is impossible to disentangle the mortgage market from the rest of the capital market, housing technology from the rest of building technology, or housing markets from the rest of the economy. In brief, conferring truly exclusive jurisdiction over housing is an impossibility. We believe strongly that there is a continuing need for both federal and provincial governments to play active roles in housing policy and programs. And we do this from 3 standpoints. First, we believe there are tasks which each government is most appropriate to address. For example, only the federal government can deal with large financial institutions on approximately equal terms. Only provinces can plan their land uses effectively. Second, only the federal government can promote basic standards across Canada and redistribute the resources required to attain those standards. Thirdly, only from a strong and vital center can effective decentralization take place. We have been on record for years as favoring decentralized program delivery. We realize that this committee, before it makes recommendations on the constitutional jurisdiction over housing, must deal with a number of important considerations. The issue of respective responsibilities was addressed in the 1984-85 national consultation process led by the Honourable William McKnight. As a result, over the past 6 years, actions have been taken to strengthen the federal presence in housing areas such as education and training, energy efficiency, research and development, and the environment. Major decision-making authorities have been decentralized to the provinces, and mechanisms have been put in place for federal-provincial cooperation in setting overall policies and priorities and carrying out joint initiatives. Has all this been possible under the current Constitution? The answer is yes. Are there particular aspects of the current Constitution that have made these developments difficult? The answer is no. Are there particular aspects of the current Constitution that inhibit provincial governments from playing a lead, indeed predominant, role in housing? Again, no. Have provincial governments been calling for transfer of powers now in Section 91 of the Constitution Act to carry out their housing responsibilities? No. Are there particular aspects of the current Constitution that prevent the federal government from meeting its housing obligations? No. Is there extensive evidence of provincial objections to the role and responsibilities of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation? Again, no. Has our principal housing authority, the CMHC, and other government departments fulfilled their roles effectively for the federal government? We believe yes. Do current arrangements between federal and provincial governments promote cooperation? Again, yes. Does progress in this cooperation require amendments to Canada's Constitution? No. Would there be benefits to provincial governments in having exclusive jurisdiction over housing without associated federal funding? The answer is clearly no. Would there be benefits to the federal government in providing funding without a recognized role in housing? No. Is there a benefit to both producers and consumers of housing in having a federal presence in national standards, investment in research and development, and support to northern and native areas and so on? Yes. What must be understood is that debates between the federal and provincial governments, particularly concerning the allocation of resources, are political rather than constitutional in origin. Attempts to resolve these political debates through constitutional amendments will throw the baby out with the bathwater. The federal presence in housing is critically important, as is the presence of provincial governments. Political leadership is essential, rather than its abrogation through constitutional change. We come now to the contents of the federal proposals. The discussion paper has some key words. Change is not proposed for the sake of change. Sectors that function well should not be adjusted. Change is only proposed when it will improve the service or program Canadians enjoy or receive. We would welcome any steps to improve the functioning of the housing sector. In our view, present housing structures and arrangements work rather well, as demonstrated by the obvious results. We enjoy the highest quality of housing in the world. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is the linchpin of that success, since it integrates the financial, economic, social, technological, and cultural aspects of housing in a single agency. It is a structure that recognizes the important role played by the provinces in the housing field. It facilitates innovation and learning from experience all over Canada. Our local and provincial council members from across the country wanted to continue to form part of a stable environment for their activities.
like you, sir, to try to conclude at this stage.
I'm just about finished, sir.
Okay.
In more specific terms, we believe that the existing federal research and development capacity, as well as responsibilities for international and environmental affairs in the housing field, should not only be maintained, but strengthened. We have a number of considerations to place before you today. It would be desirable to continue the process of identifying ways to streamline further program delivery responsibilities. There could be value in ensuring formally that new Canada-wide shared cost housing programs would not be introduced without provincial assent. There is a potential to establish the Conference of Housing Ministers as a more effective guiding body to coordinate provincial and federal efforts to achieve national standards and a more effective economic union from a housing perspective. Such an approach would be a natural complement to the idea of a Council of Confederation. The experience of the National Housing Research Committee suggests that the groundwork for future cooperative relationships of the kind we propose has already been well laid. We are putting forward these considerations, as the constitutional lawyers say, for greater certainty, rather than because we think a constitution-based problem exists in housing. And that brings me to my final point concerning priorities for change. We believe you will need to concentrate your efforts in order to achieve your mandate. There is simply not enough time for 28 proposals, all to be addressed adequately. It is not safe to assume housing is a matter that can be disposed of quickly and easily. Instead, you may see the need to set it aside for future processes as appears appropriate within the larger scheme of things. It certainly does not fall into the same category as distinct society and so many other matters on your plate. That is not because it is not vitally important. It is, but to our economy and society, rather than in the field of constitution building. These are very difficult times for our industry. Bankruptcies are occurring in large numbers. Production forecasts for this year are lower than they have been since the last major recession, and next year may only be slightly better. Above all, now and in the future, we require an environment of certainty about the rules of the game. For we as builders are those who make it all happen on the ground. We bring together labor, materials, land, design, technology, consumer needs, and regulatory requirements to shape the end result. If we are unable to perform our task, everyone will suffer now or later. In closing, we would like to say that Canada is our country by choice as well as by circumstance. We want it to continue to be the best country in the world in which to live, to bring up a family, to learn and develop our potential. We are speaking as citizens on behalf of fellow citizens, and that is our chief concern in these matters. Builders feel they make a substantial contribution to the quality of living in this country, and they want to continue to do so. Chairman, I wish we had more time today. I appreciate the constraints that you're operating under. The three gentlemen with me would be prepared, along with myself, to answer your questions, and we'd be pleased to entertain them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And we now start the question period with the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome the association here and apologize for all of us for the delay of the division bills, which went on longer than we thought. Your main concern is, I think, the recommendation of the government that you have as exclusive provincial jurisdiction in the area of housing. And you're arguing here for a federal role and a provincial role, that the two of them should cooperate as much as possible. I wanted to ask you about an idea that a few of us were playing around with last spring, and it's the idea that perhaps for a number of fields we should have an area designated specifically as a concurrent power or shared power, where both levels of government have the right to be active in that particular field. And you suggested that housing is sort of in that position today. But I wonder if we shouldn't make it more explicit. I mean, in our Constitution, agriculture is a shared field. Immigration is a shared field with with federal paramountcy. There are a few other shared fields. I'm wondering, rather than just having it as exclusive provincial jurisdiction, whether or not it might be wise to shift it into an area of concurrency, make that very explicit in the Constitution.
Well, I think I made the point in my prepared delivery that as the process exists today, there is a lot of shared responsibility. I could make the analogy that if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And as we currently see the situation, there seems to be a good sense of cooperation both between the provinces and the federal government. The system works well. The federal government, in its mandate for international and native affairs, research and development, mortgage insurance, financial considerations and things of that nature, do have a clearly defined role and a legitimate position to take. On the other hand, in terms of actual targeting within the provinces, land use, there are specific items within the provinces that they could and should look after. So I think the situation exists today as you suggested it, and our position is that it works now.
I was wondering, since these people, Mr. Chairman, are experts in the field, do you know are there any other federations in the world where housing is exclusively of a provincial or state jurisdiction? I think of federations like Germany, Switzerland, Australia, the United States. Do any of those countries have housing as an exclusive field of activity for the state or for the canton, whatever it may be, or the lander in Germany?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Kenward, our Chief Operating Officer.
I guess the reason I asked that, if you don't know, I understand, but if you do know, it might be useful to learn from the experience of others. Maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there is a situation of that kind.
What about the flip side of that question? In the other federations, is it exclusively federal or is it shared? Do any of you know?
Go ahead, John.
I believe in most jurisdictions you certainly find the shared component in relation to the role of municipalities. So in those situations, yes, you have a shared responsibility. Your concept of a category for concurrent powers and so on, to clarify, if you like, respective roles, this is not an abhorrent suggestion so long as it would not have the effect of disturbing a system that is balanced now, within which both levels of government, federal government and the provinces, seem to be working particularly well.
See, what one could do if it was a concurrent field is to have provincial paramountcy, for example, or federal paramountcy. I suspect that the government would prefer provincial paramountcy, but as long as it's concurrent, it'd be much easier to set the national objectives or standards or whatever. I wanted to ask you, in terms of dollars and cents for the ordinary citizen, if it is transferred exclusively to the jurisdiction of the provinces, will that have a financial impact on the ordinary citizen in Newfoundland or Saskatchewan?
It would certainly have an impact to the extent that there's no guarantee that the monies would be spent in the areas where they're best needed. I think we have a situation today in Canada where through equalization payments and whatever, the provinces collect the money, it goes to the federal government, distributed back to the provinces. There is a sense that housing is targeted as it should be. And we think that should be the case right now. We think that a strong federal presence in that respect should be maintained. I guess the concern we have is that while the provinces can recognize many of their own specific needs, we want to make sure that the housing pot is still there and that the money allocated to housing on a federal basis remains in housing. Housing is a basic need, and I think it's important that it be viewed that way.
I think Mr. Edmondson had a question.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Lauren. It seems to me that as much as we search for some harmonization between the federal and the provincial, it's just not always there, and it must make you find it very difficult to find which leg to dance upon, because many times they may be in conflict. I understand, though, that there is a process now where the provinces and the federal government try to work these things out on an ad hoc basis, and that there is a tendency more now towards harmonization. I'd like to ask if you found this tendency to be true, that this seems to be where we're going, or perhaps you might find it's the exact opposite, it's getting worse. And secondly, we have a mechanism in one of our propositions to have a conseil of the different provinces together where they would work out some harmonization, some agreements. What do you think about this? We've heard complaints or we've heard criticism that it would be just another layer of government, and that if things are working fairly well, not perfectly well, but fairly well, you don't, as you said before, you don't fix it if it's not broken. I'd like to hear your views on that.
Well, in terms of your first position about whether or not there is harmonization, how difficult it is to achieve, and whether or not we know which leg to be dancing on.
For your industry.
For our industry, I'll say that we have no problem in knowing which leg to dance on. We enjoy, I think as an industry, a particularly good working relationship with government. We liaise closely with not just, CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. We liaise with CEIC in terms of education and training and professional development for our members. We liaise with immigration, again CEIC, in terms of providing sufficient workforce through immigration. We work closely with Department of the Environment in programs such as the Green Plan, and out of that program such as Advanced House, which is a prototypical new housing design that we are evolving. Really the next generation of R2000, which you may know as a housing energy efficient concept. Programs such as R2000, which involved the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources. So, to be honest with you, as an industry, we enjoy a very close working relationship with government, and we see that out of that process that evolved in 1984-85 on the consultative process on housing, we worked with the minister responsible at the time, Mr. McKnight. I think at that point in time, the responsibilities, both federally and provincially, were devolved, and the situation became one that we have to this day, and it's working.
So it's not broken?
No. You want to add to that, John?
I would just like to add to Mr. Reardon's remarks that in order to get a good perspective of housing, one really does have to go back to that 1984-85 consultation process, because one of the issues that was defined then was what should be the nature of housing policy in Canada, how should the relations be between the federal government and the provinces. And what we've witnessed for 7 or 8 years now is increasing cooperation between the federal and the provincial governments in a variety of fields, the establishment of critical mechanisms to facilitate that cooperation, like the National Housing Research Committee, like the meetings of ministers responsible for housing, and so on. One has not sensed a debate about paramountcy. If I could reflect your colleagues' comments, I don't sense that has been an issue. Of course, there is always the issue of resources. Who is paying for what? The concern there, as we have suggested, is a political matter which will always be inherent in the federal system between and among governments. But it's not rooted in a constitutional dilemma. The federal governments and the provincial governments have done a remarkably good job of sorting out this particular area of jurisdiction over time. It is the case that there is sometimes frustration because provincial governments have not necessarily taken steps to take all of the authority and responsibility that they have been offered. There are frustrations in other cases where provinces simply don't have the resources, and I'm thinking of some of the provinces in the Atlantic or the territories to assume those responsibilities, and indeed have asked the federal government to maintain their commitments through Canada Mortgage and Housing. So that those are frustrations, but my goodness, they're not frustrations that demand constitutional review and constitutional change.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now turn to the government side and Mr. Littlechild.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. I too want to thank the witnesses for their patience in waiting for us. I seem to recall the Real Estate Association, I believe, when they came before the committee, I think specifically stated they were not going to be speaking for the home builders on an area that they argued quite strongly on, which was an entrenchment of property rights. I'm wondering if you want to comment on that aspect of it, and if you feel the same way, whether it's one that should move right away or it's an area that can wait for further discussion.
On that particular question, I'll defer to my past president, who is our resident expert on property.
Resident expert is a very loosely used terminology around our place. I happen to be invited to attend a number of sessions that Garth Turner has held with respect to this issue, and we have participated in the process to the extent of being somewhat disruptive at some of those meetings, in that we've not come out in terms of, certainly from our association's point of view, with full support of the entrenchment of personal property rights in the Constitution. I guess where we stand is sort of an amber light, if you will, on the issue. I guess first and foremost, it's our belief as a national association that we don't see property rights as being under assault currently in Canada. We think that it's the role of governments, not the courts, to determine personal property uses and abuses. One of the things that I have witnessed as a builder, and it disturbs me, and it probably disturbs a number of you around the room here, is the ever-present growth in Canada of what we refer to as the NIMBY group, not in my backyard. And if you go to any city council meeting anywhere in Canada tonight, you will witness literally hundreds of people standing in city council meetings opposing development in communities, whether it be a high-rise condominium or affordable housing in Mississauga. And we're fought every inch of the way by this so-called NIMBY group. What's important about the NIMBY group to me is that a NIMBY in Canada is a middle-class Canadian who already owns property. So the concern our association has in embracing the enshrinement of personal property rights in the Constitution is that it is our view that what we seem to witness, Mr. Littlechild, is more often than not is those who own property denying the rights of those who don't own property. So I guess, if you will, our position has been one at the moment of we're participating in the discussions along with many others on that group. We don't feel that at this point in time in Canada that personal property rights are under attack, and would put it a long way down the list of things that this group should be looking at.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Hughes?
And my question, you've clarified for me, for all of us, your position on the entrenchment of property rights. How would you feel about the right to shelter in a social charter?
I know a setup when I see one. If the question was, would we trade the social charter for personal property rights, we'll take personal property rights, I guess. I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but I think that the current system seems to me that the United States is probably the biggest single example of what we have of the entrenchment of personal property rights. And as you know, the U.S. Constitution has had that guarantee since day one. When you look at the jurisprudence and the decisions that have been made by the courts in the United States with respect to personal property rights, whether they be the denial of rights or the expropriation of land or how the homeless are treated in the United States, I would submit to you that Canada, without the entrenchment of personal property rights, has fared far better in all of those areas without the entrenchment than with it. So I think that as far as the treatment of the homeless and the provision of social housing, we continue to do a reasonably good job in this country without those property rights. And I guess the bottom line for us, is I do want to get this in, as builders, I think the biggest concern is that we don't want to be in a position to fight land development issues in the Supreme Court of Canada. We would rather continue dealing with governments provincially to resolve land use issues.
Could you just answer for the benefit, your organization speaks for members in all provinces. Does that include members in the province of Quebec on this position that you've taken?
That's correct.
I find it intriguing. I presume that members in your association must do a lot of work with CMHC. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So you're fairly close to CMHC.
Well, the situation, as you know, at the moment is that we do not have a minister of housing. We have a minister that has the responsibility for CMHC. So a lot of what we do in the area of research and development and the development of programs and inputting on what's happening in housing issues across Canada is naturally, through to our current minister, but also CMHC.
Are there aspects of, you've talked about the fact that you're quite comfortable right now with the relationship between federal and provincial governments, by and large, in this area. But the propositions here, the proposals suggest that housing might be one of the areas to recognize provincial jurisdiction. Are there aspects that you think are absolutely critical to maintain at the national level for perhaps setting standards, or some aspect that you would really not want to see devolve to the provincial level if we were to go down that road and devolve most of this to the provincial level?
Well, as I said in my presentation, there are certainly areas that we feel have to have the critical mass of the federal government. In particular, I would look to research and development. Canada is a world leader in terms of housing research and housing development. We enjoy joint venture programs with the Japanese 2x4 Association, if you can believe it, on R2000 technology. We are evolving now the advanced house program. Again, the research and development is taking place at the local level, but the incentive and the catalyst is coming out of the green plan through environment and as well through energy, mines and resources. So there are things happening that can only happen at the federal level. There are export opportunities, for instance, to the Eastern Bloc countries, to the Middle East. Laurier is perhaps one of the best examples. Laurier has just completed projects in Spain. He's just signed a contract in the Eastern Bloc. So we have housing export or technology export opportunities that really can only be coordinated and facilitated by a strong federal presence in housing.
But the way you describe it suggests to me that what you really need is the funding.
No. What we want is a body, someone responsible for the matter, someone to coordinate.
So you're really talking a very limited coordination role, which is the key. That would be the key element, along with the R&D? No,
we have to look at the financial area. Mortgage insurance is just one of those areas. CMHC are the principal mortgage insurers in the country. As part of their mandate, role, or responsibility, call it what you will, they insure in areas where private enterprise wouldn't insure. Obviously, they have underwriting considerations in those areas, but they have as part of their mandate the responsibility to insure mortgages for banks and lending institutions in those areas. The federal government has to take a position with regard to regulation of interest rates. We meet with the Bank of Canada on a regular basis and the Minister of Finance. So there are positions taken by government that certainly impact on our industry. And again, we feel that we can only liaise with a federal body in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I think
just briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on page 3 of our preliminary brief, and I won't go through that, we've itemized a variety of areas where we believe the federal role is very important. What we must express to you is this important concept of an integrating force. CMHC is the principal housing agency of Canada, and in performing its responsibilities, provides this huge and very complex industry, both the builder and the consumer, with that enormous potential that comes from a capacity to integrate all of these aspects that impinge upon housing into a whole. So it's not only comprehensible, but it provides a base for judgment and intelligent decision-making and commitment of resources. This is a terribly important concept. Canada should be very, very proud to have evolved such an agency and such a presence over time with this kind of capacity and capability. And it stretches right from technical research, education and training, market analysis, information, consumer advice. It's endless, and somehow it comes together as a whole.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must say that I thought that the witnesses' points were very well made, and in fact, it's almost, well, it's rather self-explanatory. And as I look through the list of items that the government is talking about, would like to get out of, I guess, the two that stand forth, I must say that I can't help but see tourism, because if ever there was an issue which I would have thought was a national issue, it would have to be tourism, though I realize that you're not here on behalf of whoever looks after Canadian tourism. But I've read R2000. I have the book R2000, which is put out, I think it's CMHC, isn't it? Or is it you people? Because it's, yeah. And I think, and I'm from downtown Toronto, which I would say over the last 20 years, or maybe probably 30 years, CMHC standards have played a tremendously important role in rebuilding all of that old housing stock, some of it 100 years old, which in the area where I happen to live, at Dovercourt and College, and all of that broad area of those thousands of houses. So I think that, I must say, I realize and how important it has been, the development of national standards in construction materials. The fact that I would think just for safety alone there are implications, never mind, the energy saving, with the energy problems and insulation and standards of construction materials. And I was interested in your observations, because I've thought this must be the case, that that this is becoming an important export market for Canada. So I guess I guess I'd like you to tell me a little more about that. I sort of I guess it's my hobby, and I kind of read a little bit about this sort of thing. And also, at one time I was a member of Parliament for that part of Toronto, and always, and in fact I said at the time that the rebuilding of downtown Toronto was actually one of the miracles of North America, and almost no other city. They talk about urban decay. It didn't happen in Toronto, and one of the reasons has been the way in which housing standards have been developed, and not only from the builder's standpoint, but the citizens rebuilding their houses, but knowing that when they buy materials, they know that the material comes up to a certain standard, and all of that. So I appreciate that, but I'd like to know. What successes have we had in exporting these standards and this technology that has evolved over the last 30 years?
Well, first of all, I'll compliment you. I'm not sure I could have said as eloquently all the things you just said about what CMHC has accomplished for the industry. So, and I don't mean to be here and be perceived as being all supportive of CMHC. It just happens that it is an institution that does work. In terms of export opportunities and things we've enjoyed as a consequence of a strong federal presence in housing, I certainly think that perhaps the preeminent example of cooperation and good technology development would have to be the R2000 program. For the benefit of the people here, R2000 is a building technology developed for northern climates, world recognized. Just last year I was in Ireland for an international housing conference. Pretty well everybody in this world knows and understands and aspires to a housing quality such as R2000. The Canadian Home Building Association was active with government 10 years ago in that particular respect, long before it became environmentally friendly, long before it became in vogue to be environmentally conscious. So we have a technology that not only meets an energy efficiency consideration that's friendly to the environment, but a technology that is transportable and saleable to other countries. I mentioned earlier that we enjoy a cooperative agreement with the Japanese 2x4 Association. They now, under license, utilize R2000 technology in Japan. We're working on agreements with other countries, so certainly there are export opportunities and great potential for housing technology in that respect. And I think, as I said earlier, we enjoy the highest quality of housing in the world. And wherever we go, we're part of the International Housing Association. In January, we'll be in the United States for the annual conference. And when we travel to these functions, we certainly learn, but we also have an opportunity to provide leadership, as well. I realize, Mr. Chairman, we're running out of time very quickly. We do have another gentleman with us today who hasn't had an opportunity to speak. Laurier Deschênes is our secretary. He's a builder and exporter of Canadian housing technology. Laurier hails from Quebec City. And I think it's important that you appreciate that we do obviously have a large national association, and I think it's important that when we speak on behalf of the entire country. So in that respect, I'd just like to ask Laurier to make a comment.
Merci, Gord.
Thank you, Gord. What Gord mentioned about exports is important. I have some 15 years in this field, 15 years experience in this field. We've exported to Latin America, to Europe, and to the East. The Canadian building code is highly respected worldwide. The role played by the federal government, even though, as someone said earlier, the provincial governments want more and more powers from the federal. Nevertheless, if we are to look at the Quebec government, having been president of the Provincial Constructors Association, we have 10,000 members. The government, nevertheless, is concerned about this sector, but the provincial government rather doesn't have the necessary mechanisms to do much in this field.
The federal government, actually, through its agency, CMHC, which we mentioned before, and it's a priority, and I think it's a must that this institution not only carries its activity, but must also now become, I think, a leader now in renovation, because we know that the federal government has been involved through his agency, CMHC, since after the Second World War, and now I think it's we look at the different houses that need the renovation now, and I think that CMHC must now have a leading role in renovation.
Oui, c'est ça. Et puis, les implications si le gouvernement fédéral se...
And what are the implications if the federal government withdraws from CMHC? There will be quite serious repercussions for the country. Yes, indeed, especially in Quebec. Builders in Quebec need strong leadership in the housing sector, and it would be quite disastrous if we were to lose an organization such as the CMHC. Mr. Chairman, I think the same goes for Ontario. Quebec really isn't unique in this respect. In Toronto, for example, the CMHC plays a very important role. It's not the provincial government that helps promote new housing techniques. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
For your excellent presentation, and as you have seen, we have an interesting exchange of views on the points raised in your memorandum. So I wish to thank you very much on behalf of all members of this committee. And I apologize for the suspension, but we had to do it at that time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.